Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and it's just like a dream for me to be here because I threw my heart over the fence, and the rest of me followed. Now this really started like from when I was a kid because I was about 8 years old, and I was trying to draw Bugs Bunny. And I was doing such a terrible job that I almost started to cry, and I just like cried out to God in my heart, and I said, God, if only I could draw Bugs Bunny, then I'd be a real artist. Well, it was weird because about 20 years later, I found myself at Warner Brothers, and I was working on Space Jam, and I was drawing Bugs Bunny. And all of a sudden I remembered when I was a little kid and I had wished that I could draw Bugs Bunny. And I realized that I threw my heart over the fence and the rest of me followed. And so this is the amazing thing, that our hearts really are the things that propel us into whatever is our dream. Our real wishes really come out of our hearts. Science proves it. I mean, like when you think about it, we're kind of like plants. You know how you take a little seed, and the little seed looks like nothing. It looks like just a little ball of nothing. But within that seed is all the information that it needs to become a big plant, a big tree, everything it needs if it gets the right conditions to grow in. And so what's so crazy is that what comes out of our hearts, what we want to do, is that little seed. We don't realize how powerful it is. What does a seed do? It has to start out in the dark, and just like us, we don't know what our little dreams feel like little nothings, and then we have to go through the dirt. You know, we're planted in the dirt, so we don't see anything. But what are we trying to do? The little plant is going towards the light. And I thought of this one day, that if you were a little plant growing, maybe the reason why you want to grow towards the light is because you just really want to get out of that dirt. But the thing is that you need the dirt in order to grow. You can't survive without the dirt that we grow up in. And every one of us probably had a lot of fertilizer in our lives, right? When I was a little kid, there was one word that changed the trajectory of my life. My sister was reading a book, and I asked her, I said, what are you reading? She was my big sister who was really smart. And she says, an autobiography. And so I said, well, what's an autobiography? What does a 6-year-old know, right? So she said, that's when you write down your life story. And I went, oh my God, they're going to make me write it down? And the whole thing? And I've forgotten so much already. So right then and there, I sat down and I tried to remember everything that happened that day, and the day before, and the day before, and the day before. And I said, I can't forget anything, because I pictured that I was going to have to stand before this tribunal of people who would be listening and judging me for what I had, remembered. And so it got so that like every week I'd remember more. And eventually I had a birth memory, and I remembered being born. And it was so crazy because in the birth memory, I was inside my mom, and I was thinking, I can't make it. Because like this little, I knew I was supposed to come out, but there was this little tiny hole and it was too small. And I kept saying, I can't make it. And I was like crying out. And then suddenly I saw a man in front of me, a big face of a man, but he was blue and he had a turban on. And he said, you must make it. He's like commanded me. And so I just felt like, oh no. But suddenly I felt my head squeezing. And then I said, I can make it. And soon I was out. Well, but I was terrified, because before I was born, before that moment, I was like a big light. And I just felt so much love for everybody. And I just felt like I had this great joy and mission that I was going to just come and give all its love to the whole world. But in that moment, I was frightened coming out. And then this big man picked me up and he looked huge. And I thought he was huge. I didn't realize I was small. Right? So I was this tiny little thing, but he was huge and I was terrified. And I was so scared. I couldn't see him very well, but I could smell his frock, his whatever he was wearing, and he had a little mask on and a cap on his head, being a doctor. And he picked me up and took me in the other room. And I was saying, no, I was crying out myself, crying out, saying, oh, no, take me back to that thing that I came from. I didn't know it was my mother, but I wanted him to take me back. But he lifted me up and looked at me, and suddenly my eyes did focus for a second on his face, because my whole thing was like I was afraid he was going to kill me. When my eyes met his, I realized he wasn't going to kill me and that his eyes were kind. So then I knew I was okay. But then he put me down in this little bassinet and I was so scared that I still wanted to go back there. And so he left me all alone, and I remember just crying miserably. And then I went, and I fell asleep. But anyway, that birth memory really impacted me a lot. My mother was such a wonderful person. She helped teach me a lot about psychology. Like, we'd walk down the street together, and one day we heard some kids that were just screaming at each other and saying bad words. And I asked her, I said, Mom, why are they doing that? Because I never heard bad words at home. And she said, well, it's probably what they hear at home. And I thought, oh my gosh, don't parents know that whatever they do, the kids are going to do it too? I thought, that's terrible. How could people be so dumb, So I felt as though first I had wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. But then I thought, wow, they have psychological problems? Maybe I should be a psychologist. But then I thought, well, if all their psychological problems happen when they're like little kids from bad, parents and stuff, then why not just raise people the right way from the beginning? And that's when I had that mission in my heart that I wanted to raise children and be a good example, because I felt that would be the way to change the world. If only every parent would raise their children with love and good examples, then even if it took a long, long time, because I felt like that's my job, my most important mission, rather than be a doctor or a psychologist and fix up old problems that somebody else started. Why don't I start with a new family that could have a good influence in the world? So after that, I said, well, I want to start right away. I want to practice right away. And so I needed a baby to practice on, So I thought, now how am I going to get a baby to practice on? And so one night I felt this huge, big desire to just go outside at night. And I looked up at the sky, and there were all these stars everywhere. And it just was so beautiful. And I felt like, what can I do? And suddenly I saw a shooting star, and I just watched Pinocchio, and I thought, when you wish upon a star. So I said, this is my big chance. What am I going to wish for? So I thought, suddenly I had I got the answer. I said, if my mother gets pregnant, I'll get to take care of the baby. So I just threw my heart up into the universe, and I said, God, I wished for a baby brother. And I wished for a baby brother, and I just felt like the universe heard me. And so I went back in the house, and that was it. I didn't tell anybody. It was my big secret. Well, then a few months later, my mother started getting a little fat. So I said, gee, Mom, are you getting fat? And so she said, no, I'm afraid I might be pregnant. I said, this is my wish. Maybe this is my wish. And I said, Mom, that's great. And she said, well, I don't know how happy your father is about it. He wants me to have an abortion. And here I was like 7 years old. She probably should have never told me that, because I said, what's an abortion? I didn't know what that was. And so then she said, well, that's when they take the baby out. And I went, no, you can't take the baby out. That's my little baby brother, you know? And so I was like devastated, and I started to cry. And she said, don't worry, Ruthie. She said, I'm not going to do it because I love kids. And besides, I didn't do it when he wanted to do it for you and your sister. And I said, oh my God. It was like a knife in my heart, because I loved my dad and I thought he loved me. And I'm sure he did once I was born. But I didn't understand that at 7 years old. And so I thought that I was just devastated. And when my mother saw how I reacted, she said, it's not because of you, Ruthie. It was because of the $350 it would cost at the hospital bill. And then I thought, oh my God, you mean money's more important than me? So then and there, I made the decision, or I came to the conclusion, wrongly or not, that if you were somehow inconvenient, too expensive, or not useful, then they could get rid of you. Wow. So after that, it was like all of a sudden my heart just went, it vanished. It went up into somewhere else, and it vanished, and I didn't feel anything. And then, but then a few months after my mom had my little baby brother, my heart came back, and I just felt so wonderful that, I just loved him so much. So I did everything for him. I changed his diapers. I walked around, carried him, showed him everything, talked to him all the time. And, but at any rate, let me fast forward, because that was what made me want more children. And I used to want 13 children. And I had to finally, quit on a lucky number, because there was only so much I could do. And, but let me go forward, because I only have 5 minutes left. So I met, look at when I got to be in my 20s, and I was looking around to have my own children. I was interviewing all of these different guys and nobody wanted kids. So I decided that I was, getting desperate. I was like 21. Can you believe it? I was desperate at 21. So, but anyway, so I finally met this one guy came along, and he was so perfect. He seemed like Mr. Right. He wanted not just children, he wanted a whole orphanage full of children. He had the biggest heart in the world, and he just love bombed me to like crazy. Unfortunately, he pressured me into getting married right away, and we had to say those words, till death do us part. And I was an extremely devoted spiritual person who wanted to do the right thing. So anyway, so I was always sticking with him, but he had a broken trust muscle, and he would go back and forth, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. First he'd be nice, then he'd be mean. And I'd say, wait a minute, I've already devoted my whole life to being your wife, and I'm not going to ever leave you. But he was very fearful all the time, and he would clamp down and control me. Well, anyway, let me fast forward to the big thing I must finish with, because I had that false belief that unless you were useful and an asset and not a liability, if they said jump, I'd say how high, So I was always just not listening to my own intuition. And when it got really, really hard, because he would be extremely threatening and scary, and would threaten to kill us all if I would leave him, even though I would never have left him. And I kept trying to, love him into submission and show him that I loved him. But so I was totally codependent, and I didn't understand what codependency was until much later. But when he passed away, this was the crazy thing, because I had really suppressed all my own voice and made myself very small so that I would make him happy. So when he died, it was like, it was more of a relief than grief. And I felt ashamed of myself for, you know, I remember just every day, like praying and asking God, did I make a mistake? Should I not have stayed with him for almost 40 years that we were married? Because I'd made that promise to God. I made the promise to God. I didn't make the promise to him, to be with him. But then after he was gone, I thought, have I wasted my life being this slave to somebody else? And so I remember one day I was, that I just I was crying and praying, and my tears fell down, and I opened my Bible and I looked at where my tears landed on the Bible. And I said, what did it land on? And it said, and I will restore to you the years that you wandered in the desert. There were different scriptures. One said, the 40 years that you wandered in the wilderness, I was with you. And the other one was, I will restore to you to what the locusts have eaten. And then there was another scripture that said, do not be ashamed. And it just felt so wonderful that God wasn't mad at me. So after that, I realized, you mean you're not mad at me? God still loves me. And it felt like all the love, all the brightness, the light that I had been holding on to inside, because I'd always been protecting myself from David's scariness. When he was mean, I'd built this big bubble of around me, and I'd always pray, and I'd get my strength from being with God inside of me. But outside, I was, surrounded by, I felt like Daniel in the lion's den or something. So after he died, then I felt a new beginning. I felt as though it was okay to listen to my own intuition, and I wasn't a slave anymore. So then luckily about a year after he passed away, my daughter said, Mom, Dad's dead, but you're not, you should get a boyfriend. So luckily she gave me this chance to do eharmony.com, which, even though I didn't meet anybody through that, it said, if you love bowling, go where the bowlers are. If you love bird watching, go where the bird watchers are. So I loved music. So I figured, okay, so I went to some open mics, and I met someone who was absolutely fantastic. And I'm making a long story short, but we met and we got married, and for 10 years we had a wonderful time together, and I was able to heal. Unfortunately, he passed away too. But the big thing is that I realized that when when you throw your heart over the fence, that's a precious little seed. You can't throw that away. So whatever your intuition is saying, and this is where I coach women to listen to their first intuition, because when I first met the love bomber, my first husband, even though he was so wonderful, there was one part of me that was going, red flag, red flag, red flag. But I wanted to believe the illusion. I wanted to believe the surface, that he was everything he said he was. And so my coaching is to help women to listen to their intuition, to listen to their intuition. And I realized that the reason why I did not listen to my intuition so many times was that I was afraid that doing what you want to do would lead to death. So that was my mistake. That was not true. I could listen to my intuition. So I've learned to listen to my intuition. Thank you, God. And thank you all for listening to me.